Before we get going, I'm going to start at the end, and I'm going to introduce Helen White, who is the brand and product director at BAM, and ex-Sweaty Betty product director. Next to her is Scott Stanland, who is a sustainable fashion campaigner and model, and quite the influencer on Instagram, so do check him out. Next to him is Anna Woods, who is the founder of Positive Retail, who is going to be B Corp tomorrow. I think she was just telling us, fingers crossed. And an ex-Topshop buyer and Whistles buyer. And then lastly is Lydia Bolton, who is a slow fashion designer and sustainability curator. Thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure to have you. Before we sort of dive into the panel and I get to the questions, the first one of these events that we did back in November was on sport and sustainability in sport. I do not have a background in sustainability in sport, and it was not something that necessarily is entirely germane to my personhood. But that having been said, it was still an interesting event because it was something that was entirely new to me. Sustainable fashion is not something that's new to me. Before I was at Carbon Responsible, I myself had a business trying to make the textiles industry more sustainable. It was called Seawear, probably not the most creative name. I really struggled with it. But what it was trying to do was create systems level change within the textiles industry to use seaweed polymers as a direct replacement for polyester in, at that time, the thought was yoga pants or something. What I found while working in that space, and I worked on the idea for about 2 years, was that amongst the industries where people are trying to make sustainable change, fashion is a really pernicious and difficult one. One, because the expectations of the consumer are really, really high. And two, the established ways in which garments are made to facilitate the sort of faster and faster fashion cycle means that costs and margins are extremely low, and anything that needs to be replaced has to be technically interoperable with existing machinery and manufacturing processes. And when you try to introduce an organic compound like seaweed into that, it doesn't work very well. And I'm sure Helen will be able to talk about that at length. But before we get into sort of the nitty-gritty of the one by one, each of you brings a different aspect to the conversation about what impact means within creating a more sustainable textiles and fashion ecosystem. I wonder if really quickly we might just go down the line and talk about what that impact might mean to you from your experience. So maybe starting with Helen.
So at BAM, we have a vision of creating activewear that's truly sustainable, in fact fully circular is our goal that we're aiming for. And right now we think that we've got probably some of the most sustainable activewear that's out there. And we've been on a huge journey in terms of understanding our impacts. And Simon, you've already got to mention earlier, who I'm going to mention again, who's been our guru and guide. He is a partner here at Sustainable Ventures, but before he was even working with Sustainable Ventures, we had the privilege of working with him for the last 7 years, and really helped us to unlock our understanding of our entire supply chain, where our impacts are, how we need to reduce those, and that's what's really driven us towards the idea that we've got to be producing a range of activewear that's fully circular. So that's where what our big driver is.
I guess for me, where I see I have the most impact is raising awareness, and it's probably the easiest part of the spectrum because I'm either shouting about the good things that other people are doing or just regurgitating stuff that's already there that people don't want to go looking for or are just completely oblivious to. And I think that's changed quite a lot over the period that I've been doing it, which isn't a long time at all in like the general sphere of how long fashion has been going. But I think we're now at a point where we can say people don't care, but we can't say they don't know. Mm-hmm. And so I think that has been a catalyst for a lot of my work now where I might be pushing statistics or like raising awareness on consumer behaviour. And it's got to the point now where I think the majority of people know the landscape and know the situation, and it's just about raising awareness to the masses.
Thank you. My business is a curated resale business, and I began my career in fashion 20 years ago at Topshop as a buyer, and I always think of my career in a sense of two halves. And the first half, so I started at Topshop, I moved from Manchester, I was super excited, I'd landed my dream job as a shoe buyer at Topshop, and I guess for the first 10 years, we didn't really know the impacts that we were having, and I know now we sit here today and we're like, how didn't you know? But the change in the industry from that point, kind of in the last 15 years, if you like, there has been such change, and we now know the impact that we are having. And I guess in terms of why did I set up Positive Retail and what is the impact that I want to have? Well, when I began my career, we didn't talk about profit. I know that sounds ridiculous. We were at Topshop. We talked a lot about the product. We didn't talk about the profit. And I guess kind of fast forward 10 years and Primark came along, then ASOS came along, and real overproduction came along. And with that came a massive growth or expected growth in profit margins. So, I remember going from Topshop to ASOS and sitting in a meeting, and a woman had been brought in from M&S, and it felt crazy at the time because she was saying, right, okay, well, and I was a junior buyer, so it was like my step up. And she was saying, you need to get, in the next 3 years, we need to get from like 3 million to 25 million. And I was like, we've not even got the supply base to be able to do that. But that was how fast everything was going kind of 10 years ago. And so then I guess I had another 10 years in the industry where I felt really uneasy. And by the end of my buying career, I guess the profit margins had gone from, in that 20-year period, gone from an average of 55% profit margin to like 85 was the target margin. And why was that? Well, Black Friday, loads and loads of discounting, nothing was, the value had been taken away, in my opinion, from the industry. So I knew that there was a gap in the market to bring a resale business to the UK that essentially I'm a very, very posh TK man. So I partner with amazing brands like Margaret Howell, who are here tonight, and I work with them on their surplus stocks, giving it a new home that honours all the hard work that has been put into creating those garments. And I guess the impact that I am having is I am changing the trajectory and the value decrease, because something comes in, and then it goes down in a season, and we bring the value of those garments back up because we've honoured the hard work, the creativity, and we've built stores that give a really good customer service and education about what's going on in the industry. So hopefully that's the impact we're having.
I'm Lydia. I'm a sustainable fashion designer and I've got an upcycling brand. My brand is all about reusing secondhand textile, and I do that working with individuals, showing them how they can repair, mend, remake clothing in their own wardrobe, and then also working with brands, either working with their communities and doing workshops and kind of like practically upskilling people. And the workshops also help people reconnect back with their hands. I think, like you're saying about value, we've lost our value and connection to clothing. So I work with brands kind of doing workshops, and that helps their staff and also their communities really connect back to the clothing. And then also working with brands with their excess stock and showing how you can recreate it in creative ways. And it's kind of, it's all about putting the value back in clothing. We have all this clothing and it's made from resources, and we've just become disconnected to the worth of the materials that we have. So helping highlight that and show how that with creativity, you can give it a new life and remake it.
Amazing. Thank you all. I really, the idea of putting the value back in the commodity really resonates with me, because I think it's something that's very true of a lot of industries. I mean, we can talk about the way electronics like automatically degrade when a new one comes out. And so there is certainly, if fashion can be a sort of, lighthouse example within an industry about how to meet that moment and reverse that change, I think that's something pretty important and cool. Moving on to the sort of state of play, I don't probably need to harp on to an audience here who's going to be too well informed, I'm sure, about the destructive qualities of the textiles industry globally, right? The number that always stuck in my head when I was running my startup was 10% of global emissions, which is the equivalent of like the entirety of the United States, right, can be attributed to the textiles industry in one way or another. That's to say nothing of water, labor, and the many various sort of issues that pop up when you are making a garment in one place and then selling it in another. But if I just think about that industry, and I try to sort of bifurcate it from the system versus the products. I sort of want to start first, Helen, with you, and talk about how we got to where we are today in terms of the evolution from sort of a 4-season cycle to the many seasons that we have today, and how that has sort of affected the way that sustainable fashion has sort of grown.
It's been, you know, I've been around a bit longer than these guys actually, you know, seen it change even more than that. And, you know, back when I started, when there was literally a handful of shops, and, you know, we would have 4 seasons a year, that was it. And yeah, there has been we have no doubt as an industry created a beast that needs feeding constantly, and that's a real challenge. And I think it's really interesting that we're talking about value. That's my big thing, is the kind of, I think we have not only created this beast where we need newness the whole time, but we've also lost sight of falling in love with a product that you want to hold on to. That, you know, there's loads of great work going on in the industry at the moment about durability and making sure that clothes last long enough. But actually, I think we've kind of lost sight of that idea of I want to keep this because I love it. And have that kind of emotional durability, and kind of really valuing, like Lydia was talking about, the kind of, if people really understood how many hands have to touch a product, the fact that a pair of jeans can be the same price as 4 cups of coffee, how is that even possible? It seems nuts really, that we've completely lost sight of the value of product while we've created this beast that constantly needs feeding.
The beast is an interesting problem, because I do wonder, the beast is not going to go away, right? We have consumers now that love to consume, right? I think some of us are probably guilty of overconsumption in this room, probably. And so how do we shift, either Anna or Lydia, the systems to meet the sort of either waste problem that comes around, while also satisfying the beast?
Obviously, we all know so many issues, but I think that does present a lot of opportunity for innovation. And I did some studying recently, and it was kind of saying about how within fashion there is so much scope for things to change, and like there's so many potential solutions, like the pictures that we heard. Like there's so much room for innovation, whereas in other industries, I think they would give like the example of cars and like car production, there isn't as much scope for innovation and change. So actually that is really exciting with fashion, that like with creativity and innovation we can create loads of change. But I think there is just huge room and opportunity for change. I would say within waste, I think it's 69% of the carbon emissions comes in the manufacturing stage within clothing. So that shows how much the importance of reuse, both on individuals of valuing the clothing that we have and mending it, repairing it, but also within brands, really thinking about excess production and really targeting that issue, because it's actually the newness of the production which creates so much of the carbon waste, and how can that be addressed? And then also what can be done with stock that isn't sold, and then keeping,
Send it to me. I guess I was just thinking when you were talking about the beast, like I was lucky enough to be buying and design director in my final job, and what that meant was I could do creative stuff, but I was also like had to have a commercial head. And I remember going down to the design floor to start the season again, and what that would mean is that was a creative moment. So my designer had worked really, really hard on 3 key themes, made beautiful boards. And I just remember thinking, we're here again. Like, we are here again. And as a leader of a team, I was just like, I can't do this anymore because my heart is not in it. And I know that we are only going to sell 15% of this at full price. Then we'll discount 25% of it. Then the rest will be in the sale. Then there'll be 30% that we don't sell. And I just knew at that point the beast was not, I didn't want to be on that side of the beast. And I guess, there's enough clothing already in the world. If everybody down tools right now, not that that's what I'm suggesting we should do or it's the right thing to do, but there's enough clothing already existing for the next 6 generations. So, I think it's best to work with what is already there. People do have a really negative idea of there's not a good word for it either. It's like waste, surplus, dead stock. None of them are very like positive terms, are they? Yeah. And so also it's sort of it's surplus and waste in my experience. I'm not saying this is every retailer's experience, but a lot of the time it's like this sort of dirty secret that's kind of shoved over there, and you're sort of onto the newness. And I was very guilty of that as a buyer. Like, we never really discussed terminal stock, dead stock, waste. I didn't have a clue where it went. I remember once in my old job, somebody walking through the office and they were like, "Oh, that's somebody from TK Maxx." And I was like, "What? We actually work with them?" I didn't know, and I was a director. So, it's something that should be a joined up conversation in every business.
I'm not going to throw someone under the bus, but I have a friend. I'm always the pessimist on panels as well. I've noticed this. You lot have like brilliant businesses and solutions, and I'm like, we're all fucked. But I had a friend who's a brilliant designer, and his job at Burberry was hiding stock, like hiding fabric. And it is, you're right, when you say like dead stock, it's not dead. I know the word derives from a different place, but it's like it's lost its value, and to us, it's a gold mine, obviously. And that's why I think when you were saying about sale shopping and things being heavily discounted, to people that, I suppose you like in the room preaching to the converted, that is, I look at that and see full price and see full craft and see full heritage of that brand still. But I think there's a few things that maybe we are more detached from, and those are they're things like Shein shouldn't be allowed to list on the London Stock Exchange. That is a big solution. Yeah. So like things like that aren't necessarily solutions in the world that we live in with new ventures and things like that, but those things definitely help give space for other brands as well.
Yeah, exactly. The thing that I was actually going to come to you next because
Oh no.
this event was tailored to timing-wise, just come off the back of London Fashion Week, which you opened the show for. London Fashion Week has recently announced that they're going to align to the Copenhagen Fashion Week directives, and what does that mean? And if we talk about things that are, sort of lighthouses within industries, fashion weeks are a very important time for industries to sort of collect up, or for practitioners within an industry to collect up and look at what's happening and reflect, hopefully. What have you seen in your experience in London Fashion Week, and what do you think that change augurs for the industry in the UK more broadly?
Fashion Week is always funny because it's where a lot of people choose to campaign and protest out of. Where actually, if you're looking at like the Shein have just been announced as the most polluting brand in the world, posting 10,000 new items to their store every day, Fashion Week's now one of the slowest forms of fashion we have. It's still seasonal, it's still spring, summer, autumn, winter. Yeah, you've got brands doing off-schedule things and resort and all that rubbish, but it's one of the slowest forms we have. And the things that happen at the British Fashion Council, like New Gen and Fashion East, and the support that goes into those brands, and these are small businesses that have to find fabric and have to be creative through absolutely lack of resource. And so I think there's an amazing creativity that comes out of necessity and lack of resource, where they now do brilliant things, and those creative directors go into huge fashion houses in Paris and Milan and New York. The things that I've seen throughout like the last 10 years or so at London Fashion Week are brilliant sustainability designers that are sustainable by accident. They just make really cool things out of old stuff or out of repurposed stuff or more sustainable materials, and have had to be innovative to have cut through. And I think there's something now embedded in London Fashion Week designers that they know they have to do something different, and they can't ever compete with the fast fashion giants that we have, and they don't want to, because they know that's not the right way to go. And they know by being different and being more sustainable and having better alternatives, they're going to have better cut through.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing because you think about people like Shein, putting that to one side for a moment, and we will get to it. Companies in any sector that operate more sustainably tend to do better performance-wise, financially. And that's for a whole number of reasons, not just because of sustainability, but it means something about the management within that company that they take that issue seriously. seriously, that means that management team is robust, well-rounded, and well-informed enough about the place that they occupy in their market to like take that seriously, which means they're going to be a better manager anyway. And that leads me to Helen, when I wanted to ask you about BAM.
Okay.
And talk about a company that's well-run and successful on this stage. One of the things we're going to get to a little bit later on is the difference between the carrot and the stick. And with sustainability broadly, absent just the fashion industry, so much of what we've existed in as practitioners for the past 5-10 years has been you get credit for trying, right? Which is you produce an emission report, you produce a sustainability report, thank you, that was so nice. But what has actually happened, and how are businesses self-policing in a way that they're actually holding themselves accountable? And I think BAM is a really good example of having to step themselves up in that way. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
About us holding ourselves accountable? Yeah, so just to give you a bit more background about BAM, it was actually founded by a guy called Dave Gordon, who was, as a great sustainability activist a number of years ago, discovered that bamboo was a great fabric and that it creates this beautifully soft fabric that actually has qualities that can be more akin to sportswear than cotton, for example. And so Dave founded the business. It was called BAM, Bamboo Clothing, because that's what it was all about, rather than just the BAM that it is today. And when I joined, knowing full well that there were a whole world of potential risks around the production of bamboo, which was actually the thing that ended up unlocking for us, and this is where Simon kind of came and gave us loads of help. It was in searching through to the very source. In fact, Merrin, who's here in the room, has been to the place in China where the bamboo is actually grown that's in our clothes. It was in tracing all the way back through the supply chain, which is now something that legislation is asking all clothing businesses to be doing. But in doing that, we started to understand exactly what our impacts were, and it was in seeing those impacts, really understanding what they were, and going, oh my God, we've got to do something about this. That was our unlock moment, really, and it meant that we created our first impact report 6 years ago, and have since then been holding ourselves to account. And I think that's been, that's because of the kind of business we are. It kind of came from Dave in the first place. It came from the kind of team that we are as, in total at BAM. But it's interesting there, Scott, as well, because you mentioned about the other brands holding themselves to account, and that hasn't been happening. And I think that's part of our challenge, really, is that now we've got the big, the looming legislation that's coming, that's having to come because brands haven't been holding themselves to account. And now although I was, at one point, I thought, this could be a good thing because it could mean that the industry changes. I actually have real reservations about the impacts that it's going to have as we move forward. So the thing is, there's a number of pieces of big legislation that are coming down the track at the moment, and the great news is, from our perspective, it's all the stuff we've been working on. It's about traceability. It's understanding what's where, right back to source, where do your clothes come from, about understanding the environmental impacts, of understanding the social impacts, but then also thinking about what happens to those clothes at the end of life, which again that's absolutely been what we've been focused on. So from our perspective, we're going, okay, this is good. This is kind of pulling everyone else up here. The challenge is going to be that we're going to end up with, it looks like a great big box ticking exercise that and what's been really inspiring for us over the last 6 years is actually that there's so much innovation going on, because we've been talking about systemic change, which is actually the thing that needs to happen in the whole way that we think about where fibres come from and how we produce them and how we turn them into clothes, and then what happens to them at end of life. That whole system needs to change. And you'd think, okay, some legislation might help that. The challenge is it's all punitive, and so we end up with the risk, especially for smaller businesses. We're going to have to be investing in somebody to sit there doing the box ticking, and actually that doesn't leave any resource left to be doing the innovating, and that's a huge risk. And it just seems such a shame that the government aren't also thinking about more kind of carrot initiatives which would, give tax breaks for businesses like us who are trying to do things properly, and it's just it's a massive slog. Just trying to keep up, make sure that we're doing everything we should be doing while we're innovating, while we're trying to create great product that people want to buy, and we're trying to meet profit margins. And there's so many things to consider, and it is a real concern to me that legislation is kind of coming down the track, and I'm normally a real optimist, but I am feeling quite negative about the potential risk that it brings.
I understand that, and I think actually what I'm sort of pulling out of that is what companies are asking brand product directors, sustainability managers to do is really be corporate strategists at the end of the day that have to accept a whole load of responsibilities above and beyond their role initially, because sustainability is so core now to what brands do. And if I can just be in defense of the box ticker for a second, because it's part of what we do, I think a box ticking exercise is not inherently a bad thing when it leads to deeper understanding, right?
Yeah.
So there are avenues through which, trying to understand what's going on underneath the hood in a really robust way helps inform decisions, like the traceability aspects of legislation.
Yeah.
But equally, I agree with you that I think there is not enough incentive from the government to innovate in the materials and fiber space. There's plenty of that exists in the UK in terms of software, in terms of AI, which we hear about all the time in other systems and other places, but it doesn't exist in the same way that it does for the textiles industry, which is a shame because there's a structural advantage in this country when it comes to textiles and fashion and the sort of soft power influence that those things have.
Yeah.
So a bit of agree, a bit of a
Okay.
if I come on to the Shein question on listing on the stock exchange, I sort of want to take Hannah's point on this, because as a former buyer and someone who's been in the industry that sort of has evolved from the first place, I'm really sorry guys, from the sort of slower to much more faster version now, and Shein being, I think, the apex example of ultra fast fashion. Do you think that there's a place for the Sheins of the world in the modern sustainable fashion world? I mean, I might be, leading an obvious question, but
I mean, no is the answer. I mean,
there's demand for that. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
how do you mitigate that?
I think the frightening
Scott really wants to know here, so we'll get to Scott.
Do you want to fight me?
No.
I think, look, I don't have anything good to say about Shein, obviously. And I guess a frightening statistic from my perspective is that I think when they did a survey on who the average Shein customer is in the UK, it is kind of not what you think it's going to be. And it's, I'm probably going to quote this wrong, so just give me like a margin of error. But I think it's like a 35 to kind of 45-year-old female that earns about 55K. Okay, more. 65. Yeah. And that's quite frightening. I'm going to pass the mic.
Sorry. It's like I'm a Shein expert. The thing is, you could advocate for it if the people who should be buying it were the only ones buying it. So if people that can only afford it were the only ones buying it, we wouldn't be in the mess that we're in with their emissions and their profit and all of that. Like last year, I think they made a 30% profit increase at an 80% increase in emissions, which is nonsense. Like if they're putting that much cost and price separation, like cost on the planet and like profit price. But you're right, it's not the people who should be buying it that are buying it. There was a video that went viral yesterday of a woman with a Chanel bag, an Yves Saint Laurent belt and Cartier watch wearing a Shein blazer. I was like, that person can afford to do better, believe me. Yeah. So that's the problem with it. It's not that people are buying it out of frugality and out of necessity. It's people that have loads more money over consuming it. And the average American Shein consumer spends $100 a month. And when you go on Shein, that's a lot of clothes. There's probably like 8 to 10 things, 8 to 12 things. So that's the problem with it.
Here's the thing. Whether or not it lists on the stock exchange, I don't think it's in danger of being banned. You know what I mean? So this is still something that's going to be available to people. So if we're talking about raising awareness, or even
but they have been banned. They have been banned previously. India banned them for 5 years, and that 5-year ban has recently ended at the end of January, and it's been bought by an oil tycoon, the Ambani family in India, to relicense Shein products. So it's possible to ban it, but will the government, instead of not allowing them to list, just be, well, you can operate, but we're not going to list you on the LSE? But yeah, so it's possible. I think there's more legislation around what goes into the products and where the products are made and the traceability and who's making them and all of that. That's what we need to clamp down on, and hopefully that will reduce the consumption of it.
Okay. We are rapidly running out of time for the panel portions to get to the questions portion. Conscious that I always sort of want to end these things on a hopeful, positive note.
Keep the microphone away from me.
And we took a little bit of a dip there at the end. So I do wonder, maybe if we go, just repeat what we did at the beginning where we were talking about impact. What's something within the textiles industry, maybe we'll start with you, that is giving you hope about the future for sustainability?
Sorry. For me, it's all about collaboration, kind of like innovative, creatives working with like these larger, big companies. But there's so much creativity and so much innovation, and it's just kind of like pairing that with all of these companies that it's harder for them to kind of move in transition, but working together, with these creatives to tackle waste, to tackle all the different things, and also independent brands are able to be so much more transparent and so much more direct in how they approach things. They're generally smaller, so I think it's that pairing and merging. And there's loads of really cool brands in London and people that are like, well, stuff like this. Reconsidered, and they shred down textiles and make really cool products like furniture, like Are You Mad, who remake plastic and make really cool products. Ian Berry is an artist, and he makes these amazing installations from denim waste. So there's just so many really cool things going on. But I think it's to do that, like connecting everyone with the waste with the creatives.
I think for me, it's working with like when I go and speak to brands and say, have you got any surplus stock? The nice thing that I have realized over the past 3.5 years is that people really do want to do the right thing with their stock, and they haven't really had loads of options to be able to do that. So kind of, I do know that brands want to and are willing to do the right thing. I do have, I'm an eternal optimist. I don't think you can run a business if you're not. And then also the other thing that gives me massive hope is the customers and the education piece to people coming in our stores. And, we've hosted events with your brother and, community is massive in this space. And just, being, my brand is called Positive Retail. So, just being positive about what can happen and change that is happening and bringing people into the conversation, and it not, it's not feeling like a preachy thing. Like, actually, these are the statistics and we're offering a different way to shop and these brands are great. And yeah, I just think people want an alternative as well. So yeah, so there is hope out there.
Okay, he really is passing the buck. Okay, I'm really, really inspired by the worlds of science and fashion colliding, and that and we heard from Biophilica and radiant matter, and you just go, oh my God, this is fantastic. There is so much stuff going on out there, and I think that's the thing that I find really inspiring. There are going to be solutions. The world is going to change. We are going to make this better, and that systemic change that we need is going to come.
I was trying to. I was obviously like thinking of something that's positive, something. For me, it's been nice to not think of a brand as a brand and think of a brand as a group of people. Like, I had loads of messages from when I posted something on Instagram, and it's nice that people say, I work here, and there's a group of us that have seen this. And so it's the cut through that you do get, and it feels like a slog at times, but once you separate like these huge brands and realize that there are just people working there. I went to a John Lewis press day the other day, and never did I think I'd be like amazed at a brand doing the right things. And a part of you is like, well, this should be normal. But it's really refreshing to see high street do things really well. And I hope that in the next 5 years, it will be to the demise of super fast fashion and the rise of a new modern high street.
I agree with that. And I think one of the things that is so true is that people care. You know what I mean? Like, people who are sustainability managers within businesses genuinely want to try to make a difference. Sometimes the system holds them back or something gets in the way, but they get up the next day and they try. They look for new solutions. They go start their own businesses, you know, after a 12-year career and try to just make a difference. And I think that's really inspiring.
Let's give a big round of applause to the panel for their participation tonight. Thank you all so much for the spirited debate. Really enjoyed it.